Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Renee Eisenbach, and I'm a member of the architecture faculty. And I am really pleased to have all of you here with us tonight. I'm also chair of the Keibel Gallery. Tonight's lecture is the third and final one in our spring gallery series, Agency, Intervention in the Public Realm, which has brought a group of diverse designers, artists, and experts to discuss how art and design can engage the public, spark critical dialogue, and better communities. The three exhibitions on view, the 2012 Seed Award winners, which are on the Linear Gallery and very easy to miss, and Casual Computing, the work of Evan Roth, and Reston, the Art of Community, in the Keibel Gallery, celebrate active engagement of art and design in the public realm and challenge the way we think about our role in its definition. Tonight's lecture, Public Space, White Walls, and the Internet, will be delivered by Evan Roth and followed by a reception outside of the Keibel Gallery. To fully appreciate the work and get the full experience of casual computing, I encourage you to don the headphones and to enjoy. Roth's lecture and exhibit are presented by the School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, the Keibel Gallery, and in partnership with the University of Maryland Digital Cultures and Creativity Program, the Department of Art, the Honors College, and the University of Maryland Art Gallery. I wish to thank Hassan Elahi, Director of the Digital Culture and Creativity Program, for his help in making this possible. I don't see where he is right now, but he must be here somewhere. As well as Chip Richardson, Director of the Studio Art Program, and John Shipman, Director of the University of Maryland Art Gallery. We're also grateful to Kristen Fox, my gallery assistant, Tom Swift, the Fab Lab Director, and Christine Arnold, Catherine Stratton-Treadway, Jeff Gibson, Chris Carmen, Deborah Bauer, Natalia Dickinov, Libby Lee, and Golnar Ershad, who assisted us in the installation of casual computing, and in particular, I think it will be pretty obvious, it's the piece that was called Level Cleared, which consisted of 1,500 individual pieces of paper. Their time made the installation of this work possible. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Evan Roth, who skillfully enabled a long-distance collaboration and installation of his work. Evan Roth is an artist and alum of this school. He received his Bachelor of Science of Architecture in 2000, and then went on to get a master's from Parsons School of Art and Design. Based in Paris, Roth applies a hacker philosophy to an art practice that visualizes transient moments in public space, online, and in popular culture. Roth's work is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art, and has been in New York, and has been exhibited at various institutions, including the Centre Pompidou, the Kunsthal Vienne, the Tate, the Fondation Cartier, and the front page of YouTube. In 2012, Roth was awarded the Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt National Design Award. He is also co-founder of the Graffiti Research Lab and the Free Art and Technology Lab, aka FAT Lab, a web-based open source research and development lab. Roth is fascinated with the misuse of seemingly rigid systems and the effect that philosophies from hacker communities can have when applied outside of computer screens. His work demonstrates how small shifts in representation can enable us to visualize transient moments in public space, online, and in popular culture. Ironically, given Roth's interest in the digital realm, for me, it's actually been the collection and the conflation of individual touch and gesture and its shifting relation to our digital traces that has drawn me to Evan's work. Whether it is the literal trace of fingers in motion, playing Angry Birds for a week straight, captured in Level Cleared, or the extension of Tempt 1, a paralyzed graffiti artist's hand, tagging an LA building located far from his hospital bed, made possible by Roth's iWriter, or the collection of images in his cached self-portrait, or the realization in free speech that one's own words are being broadcast into the public realm. These are pieces in that relationship for me between touch and gesture, individual identity, and the digital realm that I've continued to think about as I've contemplated his work that's up in the gallery. Please join me in welcoming Evan Roth tonight.
Thanks so much. It was a really nice introduction. Is this on? Can you hear me okay? It is super exciting to be on this side of this podium. I have been on that side many, many times. Is anybody required to be here tonight? Because I used to be so pissed when I had to be required to come. There's just so much work to do, so thanks to the required people who are here tonight. No, it's super, super exciting to be back here. A lot of friendly faces in the crowd, so that's great. Really happy everyone's here. I'm going to talk a bit about my work and kind of this connection between art and hacking. Some of the work I'm going to be talking about is in the gallery, some is not, but a lot of it has to do with this kind of middle ground between an art practice that's based in philosophies that are stemming from open source development and stemming from hacker communities. Great. The work that I make shows up in a variety of media and a variety of places. I have one side of my practice that shows up in public space, sometimes being small hacks and interventions on my own. This is from a series called Propulsion Paintings. They're just very simple modifications to spray paint cans. I have another series of work that are more tool-based, working with graffiti writers and activists. I'll talk about that in a bit. I have another side of my practice that exists in more traditional art venues and in more traditional art mediums, like, for instance, sculptures. And then I have a third part of my work that exists entirely online and is work that's meant to be viewed natively within the web browser. And a lot of my work is inspired by things that come through the web browser. This is from a series called One GIF Compositions. There's another series of these in the screens out front. These are using found animated GIFs and repeating them hundreds of times in the browser, so the compositions are made based on how they load in, so each viewing is kind of unique. And so these pieces, they're really different mediums, different content, different audiences, and they seem really diverse, and they seem really different, but to me they're all connected through this idea of the hack, and so hopefully by the time I'm done today, they'll seem a little bit similar than they look right now. So just proof that I did University of Maryland. I thought maybe I'd start where everything starts. Cube. Are they still doing the cube here? Yeah. I thought I had this figured out, and then maybe I don't. Maybe I still don't have the cube figured out. I'd like to redo it. I'd love to come back and try to redo the cube. So while I was here, I went through. I had a facade project. I had a golf course. I did an apartment building. Did a community center. But I wanted to show this sort of kind of track the path from the cube to what's in the gallery out there, right? And so even in these first few slides, you can sort of start to see me like kind of maybe becoming more obsessed with the technology than I should have been, right? Like drifting away from the architecture and like really kind of getting into representation. I was kind of maybe getting into technology to a point where it's probably influencing my designs in a negative way. But it was okay. I was going through this process, graduated, started working in DC for a couple of years, and continued this, like getting more and more into the technology, learning more about representation, trying to put some of these things online. They were getting more and more abstracted, and to be honest, looking back on it, I was caring less and less about the building and just more, I was just into these computers, you know, and it's probably not the most healthy, actually. But then a big thing happened. Actually, Max Asari, Maryland grad, former collaborator of mine, we started a website. And this was a huge shift for me. Like, there's two big things that kind of were a shift. And one was I reacted really negatively to cubicles. Like, I had a cool job, and my bosses were cool, and my workers were cool. Max was there too. It was a great office, but like I really reacted negatively to the office environment. Like, I couldn't handle it. So that was one big thing. And then the other thing was, at the same time, I was part of what I've later heard called the Bored at Work network, right? Or this network of people that are in front of internet browsers all day long and wasting company time, right? I was part of that community. This community is now one of my primary audiences. I'm dead serious. They're a great audience. And Max and I think we were being influenced by the web because a lot was going on. This was like 2000, so this was right when kind of Flash really just dropped, and it wasn't even ActionScript yet. It was some really weird syntax, but you could program stuff and it would happen online. It was the first time like the web kind of moved past interactions that were anything beyond like a rollover. And so it was getting influenced by this coming through the browser, and Max and I were working on these kind of experiments after work, a lot of times during work, having long lunch breaks and kind of trying to figure out how this stuff worked. So we were just making these sort of weird experiments, and we were publishing them together in this online space called 9.com. And this was like having an internet hosting account, to me, was what I assumed like buying a gun feels like. It was a kind of empowerment that I knew was probably wrong, you know? Like it just like, I felt like, how can I be spending $100 a year on this account and I can say whatever the fuck I want. There's nothing, that nobody can take it down. I can speak to this, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of people on a daily basis. And it was just huge. Like I felt like it couldn't last. I felt like it was too good to be true. I felt like this can't last. There's no way that this can be this cheap and this empowering. And so it's like just like playing as much as I could. And to be honest, I'm shocked that the internet is still as free and open as it is right now. But I still have this feeling. I still have this feeling like, wow, we should just really be playing in this medium because who knows when this is going to disappear. So Max and I were playing pretty hard in this medium. And it was really just experimenting. We were both kind of learning code. We were both playing with interactivity. And this was a huge shift for me. Like, and the time I was spending outside of work on these projects that we were doing together was, to me, it was much more interesting than the time than when I was in the office, just personally. Like, I was much more invested in that. I couldn't wait to get out of work. I couldn't wait to upload files to the internet. It was awesome, you know? And so that led to two things. It led to a move to graduate school and a media art program at Parsons, and that meant a move to New York City. And this was another big kind of shift in my work. Because where the web was this huge influence, New York meant influence from public space that I'd never really experienced before. Like, things like graffiti had kind of been a passive interest. I know there were even things that Max and I were talking about at the time, but I hadn't really experienced like living in a city like that, living around graffiti, living around street art, living around things that were happening outside that weren't advertisements. And so New York was a really big influence on me. I was walking between my apartment in Brooklyn and classes in Lower Manhattan, and kind of just absorbing like all this life that was happening on the walls and all this graffiti that was happening in New York. And then I was sitting in class and really learning how to write code for the first time. And those two kind of influences were big. Like getting introduced to a new media art scene, which was something that was totally a new phenomenon to me. Like, Max and I were making this stuff kind of in a void, right? I remember when we saw someone like using Flash in an airport one time, we both freaked out. We were like, whoa, other people use this? And so I met you know, influences on my work, Zach Lieberman, a lot of people at Parsons in New York. And then at the same time, I'd leave class and I'd walk home and I'd get this influence from all these other people that I hadn't met at the time, but these names that would become familiar to me and would later become collaborators, and some of them friends. So I thought I'd show some of the work I was doing once I got to graduate school, because it changed quite a bit. And I got really into data visualization for the first time. I was like pouring through Edward Tufte books. So you'll see some of that influence in here. This is one of the first data visualization projects I did. It's called Explicit Content Only. This is a data visualization of NWA's classic gangster rap album, Straight Outta Compton. And it's edited down to just the curse words. So I'm going to play the title track, Straight Outta Compton, for that, and you can get an idea of what the entire record sounds like.
Motherfucking niggas on ass. Motherfucking niggas, motherfucking ass. Motherfucking niggas, motherfucking smoke up. Ass nigga, motherfucking pussy ass niggas, motherfucking pussy, bitch, bitches, motherfucking shit, motherfucking ass nigga, motherfucking what? Motherfucking nigga, fucking drop that, they talk motherfucker. Damn shit.
See, you'll notice it's not very like musical, right? This is a lot of the work I'm doing. I'm trying to treat almost like a researcher would treat it, right? So the cuts are just based on whatever content couldn't be on the radio, I was cutting out, right? And this was back in, I think this is back in like 2005. There's kind of a whole genre of this work called like supercuts now, where you can go on, if you do a YouTube search for supercuts, you'll see a lot of work that's like this kind of pulp media, like taking something down and cutting just to the pulp and showing just that work. And so this record is in the gallery. You can hear NWA on side A and Eazy-E's Easy Does It album on side B. The NWA album is 3 minutes and 11 seconds of entirely the content you couldn't hear on the radio. And so for me, this was kind of, it was a lot of my work going to be talking about fun a lot as a motivator. But it was also it was also getting into ideas of copyright. I was getting really interested in copyright, free speech issues, remix culture, all these things. And so part of this project for me was dealing with this like changing role of censorship, right? Like when I was young and heard NWA for the first time from like an older kid at a bus stop, and it just blew my mind, right? I couldn't go buy that album. I couldn't walk into Walmart and buy that album. They wouldn't sell it, you know. And if they sold it, it was the censored version, which nobody wanted. And that was my relationship with creativity and censorship when I was young. Now, as an adult, like this is what we had to worry about back in 1985, right? This was the bad guys. It wasn't so scary anymore. But what's much more scary is this, right? This is censorship now, right? This is why you won't be able to get access to content, right? It has much more to do with brands and copyright than it has to do with the actual content that people are interested in censoring for whatever reason. So the piece is kind of meant to be playing with some of these ideas. That piece was my first cease and desist notice. Parsons got a cease and desist on that piece, which they took off their server, and I immediately put back on my server, and it's been there ever since. So apparently, I don't know, they don't care about my website, but they care about an EDU. Maybe they get more nervous, I don't know. So that was one example of a project I was doing in graduate school. I was also starting to look at graffiti a lot. Like I said, I was reading all this Edward Tufte books, and I was thinking a lot about like what would he do if he was obsessed with graffiti, right? And so the first step that I think most people interested in data viz would do, the first step would be to gather a good data set, right? So the first thing I was doing was just taking a shitload of photos, and I would try to take them in a way that wasn't curated. Like I would make a rule set for myself, which was usually like a map to start with that was just a grid in New York walking up and down, and I would shoot every graffiti tag where it was legible, it hadn't been painted over, that was from direct contact, like ink on the wall as opposed to spray paint on the wall, right? Just as a way to narrow it down. And so I have this huge database of all these graffiti tags I was taking. And Tufte has this really nice small multiple theory, right? Which is that if you have this large data set, if you represent all that data in a similar scale, in a similar way, so that the representation isn't what's different, right? The representation of all that work is exactly the same, so what sticks out is the differences, right? So you can pull back from that data set, and your eye should then focus on what's different between the data, not in how they're visualized. And so what I did then was I would start to look at, okay, what characters are being used in this given block? So it was a lot of E's, it was a lot of A's, it was a lot of S's. And so I would take the graffiti tags and kind of clean them, remove them from their context, which is like a cardinal sin amongst graffiti aficionados, but it was necessary for the work. And it's hard to see here, but I would take the tag and I would highlight the letter in red and then blow that up and then make these grids so that you could see how different graffiti writers in specific areas were writing the same characters. So here's the letter E, here's the letter O. And so this series, this is like a kind of ongoing series. It's one that I love doing because it gives me an excuse to walk around and shoot graffiti photos and kind of understand the city in a different way. And there's parts of it I like where it's even something as simple as like the letter S, right? Like a single gesture just like this. I think of like one time when I was trying to like learn how to play a Metallica song on a guitar at my grandfather's house. I had some like a tablature out, had notes out, you know, and he was like, there's no notes in this, like how would you play this? It's like, there's no music here, you know, what would those notes even say? And so when I think of this project, I kind of think of that too. It's like giving someone the language to understand this very coded thing that's like all around us. Because there are notes here, right? You can see intent here. You can see that even something that's just a simple gesture, there's thousands of ways this is represented, and it's intentional and it's happening like around us on a daily basis. And the other side of this project that I like, looking back on it, especially is maybe even outside of graffiti, I think pieces like this, what I hope they do is like, even if you could care less about graffiti, like I think a function of art can be allowing you to see your everyday surroundings in a new way, right? And I think that this can kind of lend to that. Like I think of this as like graffiti writer vision. You know, this is like how graffiti writers experience the city. And so by showing people this, or showing people different aspects of giving people information to kind of understand that language, like a really, I don't know, if I could, for people to go out in the city and be able to see this, you know, be able to experience like the same block that they've walked down 100 times and then see it a totally different way, for me that would be a function of art that's separate from anything related to graffiti. So that was one way I was kind of studying graffiti. that was called Graffiti Taxonomy. Another way I was starting to understand graffiti was I was hanging out with graffiti writers more. I was like meeting more and more graffiti writers, and I was documenting them. I was going out with them at night and filming them. And I noticed that like something I got to see from going out with them was I got to see the movement behind what was happening, right? Like this sort of dance that was happening. And that's something that you never get to witness unless you're writing graffiti or you're going out with graffiti writers. Like most people's experience of graffiti is the ink on the mailbox the next morning, right? And so I started to get really into this idea of like being a documentarian rather than being a graffiti writer. Like graffiti has this really strong relationship with documentarians, movies like Style Wars, photographs and books like Martha Cooper's Subway Art. There's these pieces of, there's documents of that movement that have helped it like cross the ocean, for example. Like documentarians have had to be a part of that movement from the beginning because it's so ephemeral. And so I was thinking rather than learning how to write graffiti, which I'm terrible at, and which I don't work hard enough at, graffiti writers are perhaps maybe besides, I think maybe even more than architects, they're probably like the most hardworking group of artists I've ever seen. Architects probably get second though, because I remember like, working really late nights here. So I started looking at graffiti, but looking at it as movement, like trying to forget about ink and spray paint and just thinking about this gesture. And so I was studying how people had looked at movement related to writing in the past, related to calligraphy, both like Eastern and Western calligraphies. I was pouring through these kind of like diagrams. And I was also getting a little bit better at writing code, so I was thinking like, how could I take some of these ideas that people had explored in print and try to write code that would visualize that motion of graffiti. And this was my thesis project in graduate school. It's called Graffiti Analysis. And so these graffiti writers I was meeting with, I would invite them to come to my studio, and I would present them with this setup, which you can't really see here, is a piece of paper on a clear piece of plexi, and there's a camera behind it that's doing motion tracking. And it's really pretty basic motion tracking. It's just looking for this light source that's attached to the marker, and it's converting that into XY time coordinates. And so the visualization was, again, like trying to treat it like a research. Like I was trying to not make visual decisions just based on aesthetics. And so the way that line is being rendered is that the faster the pen's moving, the thinner the line's getting. The particles are getting thrown off based on vectors. So like if you rounded a corner an even way, you get this nice spread, where if there's a sharp angle, it accentuates that angle. So it's kind of thinking about how to like represent it in a way we can understand how it's layering up, right? The other thing that's happening is it's being pulled in the third dimension over time, so that it's kind of like you're writing on a piece of paper that's constantly pulling away from you, so that you can rotate around this thing in time and understand how the ink's layering up. And so that was the first part. That was the sort of capture application. And that was just for me and the graffiti writers. But then there was a playback application, which was similar, but it was used for projecting out in public. And this was back in like 2005, I want to say. So I was going out, and the idea was that as a researcher, my findings should then be back in the city, right? Rather than publishing a paper, this work made sense to like put back outside. And so the projections would be this motion. So the idea was I was projecting that motion back so that people could witness not the ink, not the spray paint, but the actual movement behind it. So it was these kind of like animated playback of these tags that I was doing for a while. That was New York City. This is in Spain. And I was doing that, and that was receiving some feedback from that. But the part for me that was like lacking in this was that it was still kind of, I was always trying to get down to good data, right? Like if we're interested in data, the data needs to be real, right? And by meeting with graffiti writers in my studio, it sort of felt like I was falsifying that. Like, and I heard this from graffiti writers too. They were like, look, yeah, I can make my tag here perfectly, but this isn't how I write. You know, the way it looks, like if we're talking about form function, right? Graffiti has this super interesting form function relationship because the way it looks is dictated by when and where and how it was made, right? Like what ledge they were on, or how far away the police station is, how crowded the streets were, whether it was night or day, like all these things play into like what that tag looks like. And so the next step with that project was to figure out how to start capturing that data like out in the city, which was more fun for me anyway. So this is a graffiti writer in Vienna who I was working with a lot. Actually, let me go back this up 1 second. And this is what you would call like a kludge, like an inelegant solution to a technical problem, where I was just holding my laptop and following, in this case, this one graffiti writer, later other graffiti writers. You can see me here in like a human tripod, and the webcam is doing motion tracking and converting this motion into data. And so I was then Then I have a data set that's tied to a time, that's tied to a location, and that was made, like graffiti is supposed to be made, outside and without permission. And so then the data to me started getting more real, started to get more interesting. And so this is part of an ongoing series of, now when I travel and I meet with graffiti writers, for a while I was doing this all over, and I was meeting with graffiti writers in various cities and having these workshops where we go out and I capture their tags, and I have this database. There's a public online database, it's called blackbook.com. Black is in the hexadecimal representation, like 6 zeros, book.com. Here you can see how it's working where he's writing on the glass, the camera's looking through the reverse side, and you can see it's capturing on the laptop. So there's this online, publicly accessible website where you can upload and download this graffiti motion data. And so other people are doing things with it. I'm doing things with it. In this case, what I ended up making was a third piece of software that would load in that data and make a 3D model from it, right? That was under the same principles as the previous software, where the thickness is based on speed, time is in the C dimension, and then this software can export to STL files, which then can be sent to a 3D printer, and so then you're left with these shapes, these sculptures, which are kind of these like frozen moments of that dance of graffiti, right? So this is like 7 seconds of a graffiti tag that's like, this is a graffiti writer in New York named Katsu. And so you can then, the gallery then comes this space where it's like a teaching tool for graffiti almost, where you can come and you can circumnavigate around the shape, you can understand how it was written, you can see speed that's like captured within this plastic. And then they're lit in a way where the shadow shows the kind of two-dimensional shape. So the sculpture from the first video is actually in the gallery over here from this graffiti writer in Vienna who he has no name, his tag is just his name, so it's really hard to talk about him and credit him properly. But he's a great graffiti writer. So it's that piece for me was about capturing motion. It was about sort of freezing motion and visualizing this sort of strange motion that like people don't really get to see very often. It was also a bit about hacking, and I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to talk about hacking a bit more, but there's sort of these two sides of hacking. There's this technical approach towards hacking, but there's a more social approach towards hacking also, which is much more interesting. And so this was like starting to play with that also, where like this graffiti writer, Katsu in New York, is widely admired and despised, depending on what side of the kind of divide you fall on with graffiti. But then by going through this process and digitizing the graffiti and removing it from its context and changing the shape so much, the curators were they didn't quite understand sometimes. Sometimes they really understood and sometimes they didn't understand. But to then bring that tag that's like on the outside wall of the museum and then bring it in where people are like, really, this was a real photo, this wasn't staged. I was like cracking up, like they're like, oh, yes. Like, that tag is everywhere in Vienna, like it's all over the place. And so for me, that's like part of what's interesting about that piece is like, again, like trying to get people to look at their surroundings in a new way, right? I'll show one last piece I did in graduate school. This was a piece, like while I was working on that whole graffiti analysis series, I was starting to go crazy a little bit because it was like a 1.5-year long project and the lines of code were starting to like stack up, and I'm really not that good of a programmer. I don't actually really enjoy writing code, and so I was starting to like look for an escape from that. And I was in New York, this was 2004, and the Republican National Convention was coming there, and there was a lot of artists who were doing interesting sort of activist interventions related to that. And I was thinking, okay, I need a break from my thesis, I just need to like do a project this weekend. And so I'll show what this is, and then I'll talk about why I still think about this kind of idea of like working on a weekend is something that's really appealing to me. So this was a very simple piece that involves postal labels, like the mailing labels that you can get from the post office. I went, you can get these for free at the post office. Got a stack of them, sent them through a home printer, and added like very little, like just did some very basic color and font matching to their original design. And so it's just this little tiny red sentence up here, and it says, the U.S. Postal Service does not acknowledge the authority of the Bush administration. It's this like tiny like micro intervention, right? And then of course, so you print out a stack of these, and then the idea is you go back into the post office and you just put these back right where you got them. Other people are then mailing this out, either knowingly or unknowingly. so this was like, this was when I was really starting to play with this idea of hacking and like looking for exploitations, right? Like trying to find weaknesses in a system that I could exploit the same way that computer hackers are exploiting digital systems, right? So the exploitation here is that they don't guard their postal labels, right? They're not expecting someone to like alter them and put them back. So that's a weakness in the system. And so that was one thing. And so this was a piece where, you know, the idea came on a Friday, the execution was on Saturday, and then the publication on the internet was on Sunday, right? It was a real, true weekend project. And so the other thing that happened is this got picked up on all these blogs. This was in a pre-social web, but it was in a post-blog web, right? Like there were still influential blogs out there, like Boing Boing. And even though there wasn't this like, had this been around in the Facebook generation or Twitter, it would have gone even crazier. But even with just like the blogosphere kind of that structure was in place. This project went around in a way that my thesis never did, right? Like there were more eyeballs on this weekend project than there were on my thesis project. And that doesn't mean it's a better project, but I thought that was interesting. And I was thinking about kind of efficiency, right? Like just printing this one like simple sentence. It's just this one line as opposed to like hundreds of lines I was writing in code that people were maybe not even reacting to as strongly as this. And so this is something that stuck with me. It's going to show up in some of the later work. But it was also a really a new way of me for thinking about activism, right? Because I was heavily engaged in a lot of protests and I held some signs. And this to me felt like more fun personally. The reaction I was getting on the internet was huge compared to if I was just going to go put on a sign and go march along, right? Like that photo might have shown up in 2 places, and this video was getting in tens of thousands of places. And so this relationship between kind of humor and activism, I've heard it referred to as radical entertainment before by an artist couple, Even Franco. But this idea that you can have entertaining media that people come to regardless of the politics, and they're going to click on it in their browser because they want to see some crazy shit, but then you kind of sneak these subversive ideas in. So all that kind of led to the formation of this group called the Graffiti Research Lab. After I left, so that chunk of work was happening, it was started when I was at graduate school. When I left graduate school, I got a fellowship at an art nonprofit in IBM, where I just was yesterday actually. And they basically gave me and a group of other people who are interested in open source ideals 2 years to just make whatever we want. It's like one of these amazing fellowships. And when I was there, I met some really cool people. I met Jonah Peretti, who started the lab. This guy, he founded Huffington Post, he founded BuzzFeed. He's someone who really understands how ideas spread around the web. I met James Powderly, who's he's a former like roboticist turned kind of hacker activist. And the two of us sort of teamed up around this idea of introducing these two communities that I was starting to hang out with more. And I would hear like friends in these two communities like kind of having the same approach towards problem solving, right? Like they were talking about things in a really similar way, even though graffiti writers might not identify as hackers and hackers might not identify as graffiti writers, but they're like very similar mindsets. And so Graffiti Research Lab was kind of about getting those two groups together a little bit more often. And so James and I started working together. We started trying to come up with hardware and software solutions that would be new tools, new materials that could be used by graffiti writers and activists within the city. The first one was called LED Throwies. This is the most ridiculously simple electronics project you can ever make. It's an LED, and you put a battery in between the leads, and you pinch it, and it turns on, and then you wrap tape and a magnet around it, and that's the whole project, right? And it's not so interesting on its own, but when you do this in mass, it gets slightly more interesting. This is from an event we did in Austria. They still make the trains in this nice ferrous metal in Austria. Like, we were so disappointed. We threw these to the trains in New York, and we were like, yeah, and it just bounces off at our feet. We were like, but in Austria, they still use real metal in their trains. And so we would have these events where we would make these with friends, and then hand them out and just kind of point, and people would be like, okay, I get it. And so we were doing these kind of interventions where we would find places to throw these magnets up. And again, it was kind of about transforming your surroundings. It was sort of about putting the materials that advertisers have had at their disposal forever in the hands of people that are actual residents of cities, right? Like advertisers have been using light to sell product to us forever, right? Like Times Square, right? But us as like people who actually live in the city versus the people who are advertising in the city, we don't really get to like tell our message in lights quite as well, but it's often because it's an expensive medium, right? So the idea was like, how can we make this media, how can we make a pixel as cheap as possible, right? So we would make these little silly videos and put rap music behind them, and that was how we would kind of filter them to the web. But then we would also attach these open elements to it. So like with LED throwaways, we would attach a how-to guide. And the how-to guide ended up being much more interesting than the video because people would actually duplicate this. And there's hundreds and hundreds of examples of people using these, some more interesting than others. One example I like is, this is from an activist group called Students for Free Tibet, who made a banner drop, right? Like how old school activist is a banner drop, right? Like this is why I think it gets more interesting when you talk about social hacking, right? Like the technical hack here is we showed them how to make really stupid Christmas lights, basically, right? And they made a banner out of it, and they went to Beijing during the Olympics, and they unfurled the banner. But because it was written in like blue LEDs, and you get this amazing photo in front of the Bird's Nest Stadium, this photo shows up like front page New York Times, right? And I think part of the reason it showed up in the New York Times and all these other places is because this photo is great, right? Like the media wants these stories, the media wants these photos. And so what we started realizing with GRL is that the biggest hack we were doing was this media hack, like giving the media these stories they want to report on, right? Like if you write the banner in LEDs instead of in black paint, the chances of you getting reported on go up no matter what message you're trying to spread. And so this for us was the kind of tools we were trying to make. Another tool that James and I, along with another collaborator, Theo Watson, made was this one called Laser Tag. Laser Tag is actually more simple than it looks. It's a relatively high-powered laser, nothing too dangerous, but more dangerous than is legal. And what's happening here is there's a camera and a projector that are looking at the facade of this building, and it's doing really basic motion tracking. Motion tracking on building facades is super simple because nothing's moving, right? Especially at night when no one's turning the lights on and off. And so we made the software that would track where that laser pointer was moving, and it would tell the projector to basically leave light behind it. It's really a very simple project, but what it would allow was for this kind of like real-time communication between graffiti writers at this scale that's like perhaps bigger than they should have the authority to be speaking of, right? And so for almost 2 years we were touring around different cities and just meeting with graffiti writers and going out with them, and we set the technology disappears really quickly actually. Like as soon as we set the system up and we hand a laser to someone and we write something on the wall, we're like, get it, and we pass the laser, and then it turns into just like hanging out with graffiti writers and writing tags at like 20 stories tall at night. And those were like, they were interesting times because even though it wasn't permanent, which actually we hated. Like if we could have made this permanent, we would have been much happier. We would have gotten a lot more credit within the graffiti community. Like graffiti writers, they didn't know what to think of this project because on the one hand, it's so impermanent that the graffiti's like, oh come on, like I'm not gonna write my name in light. Like why would I do that? But then they like realize how big it is and how immediate it is, and they're like, okay, maybe I do need my photo with that tag that big. And so it actually was an interesting sort of conversation and sort of almost moral dilemma within the graffiti community. But what it allowed, even though our intention was not to make erasable graffiti, that wasn't what we were after. What we were happy with is that, we would get, because the vandalism was removed from the picture, you get these moments like this where like the police didn't really know what to do. And so I'm interested in this project partly because for the same reason I'm interested in graffiti, the same reason I'm interested in the internet is because it's really uncurated space, right? There's really few places where people don't have any input on what you're going to say, and the internet is one of those places. And public space is the other. Like there's, for better or for worse, what's being said on the streets and writing on the walls, there's no input there, there's no mediator. And even in the arts, which we think of as this kind of liberal open space, there's always gatekeepers still. There's always curators, there's always people that give funding, there's all these steps between an audience and the work, and public space and the internet remove those boundaries in a way that I find, fun to play in. So, okay, so that was Maryland to graduate school to I-Beam. Leaving I-Beam, James and I decided to kind of change the rules of this structure of this graffiti research lab. We founded this kind of sister organization called the Free Art and Technology Lab. I was just coming, we have this is really our first group solo show that's up at I-Beam that just opened like 3 nights ago in New York, so if anyone's going to New York, you can see many of these people are actually still there. But it's a group of not just artists, it's a group of people that have a pretty wide, diverse, professional and personal interests. Like some people are artists, some people are doing tech startups, some people are activists, but we all kind of have interest in this idea of like having these ideals from open source culture, these ideals from free culture movement, ideals related to free speech. We're interested in trying to get those to move further into the pop culture sphere, right? Like there's hacker groups out there that are much better programmers than us, and they're the ones that, like, if we knew how to take down bank websites, we would do it too. But we don't know how to do that very well. So our place within like the hacking scene is more about kind of like, almost like a guerrilla marketing wing of the hacker organizations, right? Like almost like we're trying to get these issues that we feel are so empowering and so important talked about in communities and blogs and in media that aren't having those conversations. So, okay, an example. Well, okay, so the other thing about this group is it's entirely, like, we live on the internet, as one of our members said, right? Like, we don't meet in personal spaces almost ever. This group meeting that we're having in New York is only the second time we've ever met up as a group. We're an organization where anytime someone offers me money, I'm like, no, not to this group. Like, we can't handle that. We're not responsible enough for that. We don't have any rules that are kind of written down within the group. There's not any formal hierarchy within the group. When we bring in members, we give them passwords to everything. So it's kind of this experiment between like respectful anarchy amongst friends. We've never really defined a clear mission statement. It's really an experiment that's been working. The show that we have up now is like our 5-year reunion show, so I'm kind of amazed it hasn't disintegrated yet. But this is kind of, if we can agree on one thing as a group, it's kind of this Tootsie Pop model of art activism, which is that you have some nugget at the center, you know, but you kind of wrap that in lolcats, you know? You do something to make it go down a little bit easier. So, to give an example of what that looks like in practice, this is a piece we did in Berlin 3 years ago. I'll show this video. If it's possible and there's more water, I would love some water if that's possible. This is thanks so much. This is constructing a Google Street View car, right? So I'll just talk over this, but what's happening here is we're making, the Google Street View car, of course, is the device that Google drives around the world now, taking photos so that we can have our street view, right? And so what we did is we rented a car, which you can do for whatever, $60 a day. We got this roof rack off of eBay for $20. And then the contraption on the top is there's no technology anywhere above the roof. It's just cardboard and duct tape, the whole thing. Right? And so again, it's not about a technological hack. It's totally about a social hack. And so then what we did is we just drove around Berlin trying to like act a fool, right? Like trying to put ourselves in a position, like getting lost and asking for directions. That was right when Google and China. So thanks so much. It was actually a really hard design solution because we kept having to push it harder. Thinking of driving. What happened was people were so excited to see the Google car that no matter what we did, all they wanted to do was take their photos. So we kept having to like be more and more ridiculous. This is like, we wanted to stage a carjacking. And the guy saves the code. He like he was like reaching for something in his coat, and that's when I was like, it's a movie. It's a movie now. And so we were like filming this like and then seeding them on the internet. Right? So this is the chocolate at the center of the Tootsie Pop. And so the idea was, yeah, like radical entertainment, like making media that you could click on and just have a laugh about, but then also like this story would get into like Forbes and would get into The Guardian and people would start writing articles about it, and then all of a sudden, like over coffee, people would be hopefully asking questions of like, wait, I thought Google was so not evil, like why are these kids doing this? Why are they doing that? Like why do they care so much? Like what's going on? Like why should we be worried that this one company has so much of our data? I mean, this is what I'm hoping happens, right? And so this idea of audience is something that I'm really interested in and how it relates to making art, especially making activist-driven art. And so that kind of comes back to the cubicle again. This idea of the board at work network. I think Jonah Peretti, who founded this open lab at IBM, I'm pretty sure he coined that phrase, the board at work network. So the art that I'm making is trying to do this like double function. It's trying to satisfy the professional constraints in our practice. It's trying to satisfy people that are art critics, that are curators, that are people in arts institutions, and giving them something that they can talk about and something in a way that they're taking something from it and they're enjoying it in one way. And then also, like my friends that are trapped in cubicles, giving them something too that they can click on and have a laugh over, that they can have some kind of interest in it. So it's art that has these two audiences that they at times feel quite different, but there is this kind of overlap. There is a place to have, like, it's a small overlap, right, between the art world and the real world. But I think that this like little sliver is a really interesting place to be making work in. And of course, it's not just me that's here. There's a group of people making art in that overlap. Hopefully that overlap can get a little bit bigger. But we started seeing this happen like with laser tag, where like Museum of Modern Art was like highlighting laser tag. And at the same time, like it's on YouTube with like a million views and like all kinds of horrible comments, of course. And so we had some success with this, like in terms of Graffiti Research Lab and in terms of my solo practice, and a lot of that I think was due to this idea of taking these ideas, these philosophies that were coming from hacker communities, especially the hacker communities that grew up with the open source movement. And so I started like looking more into that and reading up more about how that developed, right? Because it's a relatively new idea. It's a relatively new way of innovation, right? This new collaborative group amongst anonymous people sort of making something for reasons that aren't driven by profit. It's still relatively young. And this is Linus Torvalds, who is kind of one of the main figureheads behind Linux. So even if you've never used Linux, right, but you have used Linux first of all, because Linux runs like every server on the internet practically, right? So Linux is an operating system like Windows and like Mac, only it's not made for sale, it's not made for profit, it's made by a group of people who are under a totally different system of innovation, right? They're under like a gift-giving culture, like they're prizing giving away what they make and having people use it, and that's what kind of defines your place within that culture. It's a really different system. And Linus Torvalds, in kind of like getting this anonymous group of people to come with him and develop what is one of the most complicated digital systems of our generation, which is an operating system, and making it work relatively well. This was something new, and he had kind of some ideas, and people had talked about why that was working. And he talks about it in his autobiography, the title of which is Doing It for Fun, and how fun can be this other motivating factor for making work, right? Something that's different than profit. And in looking up a lot of different hacker texts, I come across things that touch on this idea of fun. This phrase, playful cleverness, comes up a lot in hacker texts. This is a piece by a Dutch artist named Helmut Smits, which I really like. But this idea of play, this idea of fun, it's something I try to have in my work as well. This is from a series called Multi-Touch Paintings. So this one is called Angry Birds Level 1-1. So maybe that's enough. If it's not, basically if you load up Angry Birds on the computer that you have in your pocket at the moment, and you put a piece of tracing paper over it, and you ink your thumb, this is the visualization of how to beat the first level, right? So I've done a series of these. This is slide to unlock. This is username and password. And so there's a couple things going on with this. There is this connection to pop culture, but there's also, there's ideas related to identity, of course. We're talking about something personal like a thumbprint versus something very generic, which is an operating system. And for me, there's also something interesting about archiving. Like I'm fascinated with like how digital culture is changing so fast that artists are making some of the work that like was happening with the Flash community back in the early 2000s is already obsolete. It's already going away, and this is just like 6 years ago. And so I'm sort of interested now, in, especially when work comes inside the gallery, thinking about that space and that system of collecting art and museums of kind of like preserving art. How can that touch on a digital practice, right? And so part of this series is about archiving these like really kind of awkward moments that we're all having where we're just starting to touch pixels, right? Like if you remove the phone from like this slide to unlock gesture, like we're doing this, you know? And this is something that human beings haven't really had a need to do up until like 4 years ago, right? Now we're doing this like 20 times a day. And so there's something interesting there, and I think people see something like this and they identify something in it immediately, but I think maybe 20 years from now it might also talk a little bit about this relationship we're having with computers at the moment. So these are kind of individual examples of what these multi-touch paintings look like. I started playing Angry Birds a little bit more. This was a video piece I made shortly before we started talking about the exhibition here. This is this is how to beat the entire game of Angry Birds. This is each frame is me playing how I beat that level, right? And what's happening across the street in the gallery here is everything else, right? Every single attempt, every single win. So each one of the pieces of paper on the gallery back there is one attempt or one win at an Angry Birds level. And this is start to finish. It took me like 3.5 days to do. Yeah, it actually was like taxing, you know? Like, I mean, the theme of the show is casual computing, you know, the idea that these small moments that we steal away while we're on the trains, kind of this new relationship we have with computing. It's kind of funny that when I made it, it was nothing casual about it. It was like freaking like intense Angry Bird action. It's actually terrible. So this is the first time I've ever installed this. Actually, this is the first time I've shown it. I did not install it, so I should probably take that moment to thank. Is Kristen here? So this was how many? It was like 1,500 some sheets with 4 pins in each. So do the math on that, and like, thank you. Because I always wanted to show it this way, and I've never had the chance to. Because it's for me, you're kind of confronted with all those stolen moments, right? All those little swipes and all those trains, like they don't go nowhere, right? They add up into something. And so this is the kind of current state of that multi-touch project. So in thinking about this kind of idea of play and how hacking connected to all this work I was doing, it kind of reinformed my thinking about graffiti as well. Like I realized that I was never probably actually in love with graffiti in the first place. Like I was always just in love with hacking. It just happened to be that graffiti writers were like some of the most interesting hackers. It was just that happened to be the case, right? So I was never fascinated by painting. Like when I would see this piece, it wouldn't be the color scheme, it wouldn't be the craft that I would be interested in. It'd be this hack, right? This idea that they found an exploitation in the subway system, right? It's something like that is such an old part of graffiti that we don't really think about as being an innovation, but that was a big innovation, you know? Like the first time someone took a can of spray paint and took it home and pointed it at something other than their own property, that was a pretty big hack too. You know, it was a hack that changed the way every city in the whole world looks now. And so that's what I see when I look at this. I see these hacks. I see like the unintended use behind these structures. And so like my favorite graffiti is not necessarily painted well, you know? Like this is one of my favorite graffiti tags of all time. It's like 3 simple letters written terribly. But it's hacking into a system. It's taking something and completely changing the meaning of it in a way that's effortless. This is one of my favorite, like, this is that artist named William Manson, and for me this hits like everything about a good hack, right? It's playful, it's clever, anti-authoritarian, it's misuse, it's lazy, it's empowering, and it's a brick, a balloon, and a piece of string, right? I think this is probably my favorite piece of street art that's ever been made. And so, this kind of idea of like unintended use, I think, is a lens that we can look at everything. We can look at all technologies with this lens of unintended use, right? And I think things become a lot more interesting. So you look at a technology like a robotic vacuum cleaner, and how much cooler it gets. Just duct tape and kitchen knives. This isn't my piece either. I wish it was. This is from an internet meme called Doomba. But this idea of like stop putting like these products on a pedestal and start like disrespecting them, right? Like start treating technology. I think once we live with technology a little bit longer and we stop kind of caring about it so much, we can start doing things like this to it. It gets, it gets a little bit more interesting. Eric Raymond is a writer he's also a hacker. He was writing a lot in the kind of late 90s about the development of Linux. And he has this quote about Linus Torvald, the Linux creator, where he says Linus's real genius is that he was lazy like a fox, right? He always knew the quickest way between 2 points, right? And so this really struck me too, and it was like getting back to that feeling I had when I was putting the postal labels back, right? This kind of like Scrooge McDuck idea of like working smarter, not harder, right? It makes sense to me. And so I started trying to channel my inner Linus when I was making work. And so to show you a lazy like a fox example, this is from a piece called How to Keep Motherfuckers from Putting Their Seats Back. It's a very simple performance piece. So it's a zip tie, So these technologies of like kitchen knives and duct tape and zip ties, to me these are a lot of times a lot more interesting than motion tracking and all the highest tech stuff that's coming out, because we're not afraid to disrespect the zip tie and use it for something that it wasn't meant to do. I'm just coming on a lot of travel at the moment. A week and a half ago I was in Ljubljana in Slovenia. I opened a solo show there called Flight Mode that was all pieces made in airplanes or in airports. Using the zip tie piece was in there as a documentation, and it was it came from what a lot of hacking comes from, which is stemming boredom. One of the hacker tenets that Eric Raymond writes about is that boredom is evil. You have to write boredom out of your life whenever possible. And so this series of work that I was doing started because I was bored and I was starting to travel more for my art practice, and I was going through a lot of airports, and they were like this dead zone in my life where I would check in. From the time I checked in to the time I got my baggage, it was like nothing would happen. And so I was trying to think of ways to reverse that scenario a little bit, try to turn that wasted time into studio time. The first piece I did in that series is called Sky Mall Liberation. This is, so everybody knows the Sky Mall, right? I present this piece outside of the US sometimes and no one knows Sky Mall. Sky Mall is, it's like the best piece of American culture. It's so and so what I would do is I would take the Sky Mall catalog on these longer flights, and using non-sharp objects, I would start ripping out every face in the catalog just slowly over the course of the flight. And then on the tray tables, I would make these demographic studies. So these are new ones I did for this installation. This is these are new ones. This is Apple products versus non-Apple products. Kind of see people who bought Apple stock, they know. This one is white people versus non-white people. It's crazy. I've been doing the white people versus non-white people version of this for like 4 years now, and it's only gotten worse over time. It's crazy. This is touchscreens versus non-touchscreens. You can also see sort of how culture is changing through the products that Sky Mall is selling us. So it's kind of a way of taking this banal thing that's in front of you for like 3 or 4 hours on the flight and sort of, again, allowing people to look at that in a totally new way, hopefully. Another piece in this sort of airport series, this one's called TSA Communication. These plates are on display in the gallery. This is also another really simple hack. So you have the idea, you carve the idea into stainless steel, that goes into your backpack, the backpack goes through the airport security, and then this thought that you had through this really mediated system ends up in front of the security workers, right? And so I did this recently. I flew with these. The curator was like, look, you have to be here for the opening. He's like, do not fly here with those things. They're going to get you at the airport, and if you don't show up for the opening, I'm going to be pissed at you. But it went okay, so I did this recently on that flight. But there was about a year and a half where I was doing this on every flight that I was taking, and documenting that process. And there was things that I learned, even just on a personal level going through this. And so you can kind of see here, it's always hard to get these shots, because I'm sort of have this sneaky camera and I'm trying to get this shot. But this is the American flag one here. but beyond how this piece, it's really just a piece between me and the security workers, and then of course the video would be between me and the Board at Work network. But on a personal level, what I learned from going through this is that just by putting this piece of metal in my backpack, my relationship with that process was 100% different. I was no longer dreading this cab to the airport and being up at 5 a.m. and instead I was just really active, nervous. I had contingency plans. I was trying to figure out how to get the right shot and all these little things that go into documenting and making an art piece. I was going through that. I was going through what I go through when I'm in my studio, rather than just kind of drudging through this system. And so irregardless of how strong or how weak the piece turned out in the end, for me that was kind of a wake-up call where again, trying to think about a function of art. This is a function of art. Even in your own life, if you can make something that completely flips this negative piece of your life into something positive, that's something that I strive to do in the other work that I'm making. So all that work, again, a lot of the work I'm talking about, it was all connected through this idea of airports, but it was also probably more importantly connected through this idea of hacking. And one of the probably more important hacker texts, it's called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And this was written in 1996 by Eric S. Raymond. And he's tracking, again, the development of Linux and trying to figure out why that worked. And he uses this metaphor of the cathedral and the bazaar to talk about these two different development approaches towards, he's talking about it towards development approaches for operating systems. But you can read this book and think about just innovation in general, right? But the cathedral being the kind of single architect, top-down design, right? And the bazaar that happens out front being a very different system that maybe doesn't have a singular design. It's maybe cobbled together by people that just showed up on Sunday and started connecting one cart to the next, and one person's selling fruits and one person's selling t-shirts, but yet the system develops into a whole, which is a different function in the church, but they're both kind of these pieces of the civic infrastructure, right? They're made really, really differently. And so it's this bizarre model that I got much more interested in. And so all the kind of digital pieces that I'm showing are of course open source, and they have this whole other life, right? Because there's a group of people that are taking what I've made and doing something different with it. I'm taking things other people have made and doing things different with that. Maybe the kind of best example of a collaborative, bizarre style model that I've been a part of is this one called the iWriter. So the iWriter is, it was a collaboration between 6 artists. None of us had professional engineering or software development backgrounds. All of us were coming from the arts. And the 6th member of the team is Tent One, who's a graffiti writer in Los Angeles who was paralyzed 8 years ago with Lou Gehrig's disease, otherwise known as ALS, which is a degenerative disease that leaves you with no movement, right? He can't eat, he can't breathe. The only thing he can move is his eyes, right? There's only the only kind of communication device that he has. Otherwise, he's 100% there. He's smart, he's sharp, he's funny, but he doesn't have a system for communicating. He doesn't have access to making art anymore. And so the group of us got together to try to make a DIY kind of open source software, open source hardware solution for allowing him to write graffiti again. And so you can sort of see, these are earlier versions of the software, you can see how it's working. He's basically able to put on a pair of glasses that had a gaming kind of webcam, like a $40 webcam that was doing eye tracking. It's connected to a consumer grade laptop and running this software that's free. And it would allow him to kind of plot points and make letters, and turn those letters into fills that have drop shadows and all the things that graffiti writers would want. And then this footage is kind of from the second half of this trip we took with him, where he was part of a graffiti crew in the 90s that were the first people to hack the freeway system, right? Like in New York and in Philadelphia, it was all about hacking the trains, but in LA, because it's a car-based society, graffiti was all about the freeways, and his crew was the first to kind of break into that space. And so in this video, what's happening is he has the system running on the monitor in front of him, and he can kind of send that real time to us, and we're out projecting it around the freeway in LA, and then this other screen is like a live webcam, so you can kind of see these tags that he's writing in real time as they happen along the freeway in LA. And so this is all possible because it's not that revolutionary idea, because it's the same as the academic model, right? It's this idea that when you make something, you put it out there so that people can step into the research and where you left off and sort of doing something completely from scratch. You're starting where you left off, and this is kind of how the open source movement works. And so a lot of the software we were using was open source software to build this other piece of software. And because every piece of this was open, right? The hardware was open, the software was open, even the way, so these are tags that he made with the system. We also developed this open file format. So it's called graffiti markup language, which is a little bit of a joke, but the idea is that it's a very simple file structure. You could double click that file and open it up in kind of a word editing software, and you'd sort of be able to read structure, like even without very much programming. It's very simple data structure. And because it's so simple, it allows other people an input into this piece. And there's tons of examples of these, but this is one I really like by an artist named Golan Levin, who's at Carnegie Mellon. He's a lab there. And this is a weekend project for him, right? He took the data the temp was sending out using the iWriter system, which was online, people could download it. He wrote software that would control this robotic arm, which he kind of fashioned a giant marker to. And so this is like the first time that Tent got to see this and see his tag being written on a wall in ink. And even he said that like he didn't think about this when he wrote it, but like the way his eyes wrote the letters was the way his hand used to write the tag. And so when he would see the robotic arm doing it, it was actually like kind of in a similar stroke, which is kind of fascinating. But just to say that this is where that bizarre philosophy can end, right? At places like the group of us that started never thought we would get to this place, and we didn't. It got there because other people were involved. And so throwies were the same way. Laser tag is the same way. Like these systems that are open-ended, it's like an art practice that doesn't have an end. Like the good ones have life of their own after you're gone, right? They're just continuing. People are still making these things. Let's see. How are we doing on time? That's been an hour, right? I'm going to skip some stuff here. I'll just show a couple just to finish up. I'll show a few minutes of this. This is a relatively new piece called Free Speech. It's also in the gallery. And this piece to me is kind of like the audio version of what laser tag is. It's another very simple hack, a very simple open structure that's meant to empower speech within the city in a very uncurated way. And so the construct is just a van with a mobile telephone number. This was done in Vienna, so it's like a local mobile telephone number. The word free, and then a large speaker with an arrow pointing from the number to the speaker. There's no other instruction set, and there's no voice on the other end when you call in. And so the idea is that if someone just happens to call this number, when they're like hello, they hear hello really, really, really loud. Right? That's the structure. There's no censor button. And then so for 3 days, I drove around with the curator around Vienna, and I'll show just like about a minute of what this looks like, or what this sounds like. Unexpected amplification, right? It's not the kind of speech you would get if someone knew this was going to happen. It's about presenting people with this in a way where they didn't leave the house expecting to be talking to the entire block, right? And so that's why some like the guy laughing, or this guy at the end who is just freaking out, like these. I kind of like that they didn't use this to just give a speech, right? You're hearing people reacting really honestly to this feeling of empowerment, right? And this is kind of. That's one of the thing I like about hacking. It's like this is like about giving that feeling of empowerment to people, even if it's just for a minute. And the last piece I'll show is a brand new one that just opened 4 days ago at this show at IBeam with the Fat Lab in New York. If anyone's headed to New York, I'd like to invite you to give an official TED Talk. Congratulations, you've all been selected. So the piece is. It's a simple sculpture that's just wood with red paint and a red carpet and a spotlight and a projector, and there's a little stand where you can wear the really cool like flesh tone wireless microphone that every TED presenter gives. And that's it, and you can bring your own PowerPoint presentation, and there's lots of people are kind of using this. There's a USB stick in the installation where you can download the official TED intro and outro sequences along with applause shots and like, and of course like, there's a series of standing ovations you can choose from. How every TED Talk is supposed to end. So these were all photos from the kind of opening night. They're also just really good kind of like bio photos. I heard one person at the opening who was saying he was going to use this in his application for tenure. So it's like it's meant to be funny, so it's good. I like the laughter. That's built into the piece. But again, it's like also about that idea of empowerment. It's also about kind of circumventing the power that these brands are getting and finding these like weaknesses, right? Like you can build a Google card for like $200. I mean, you can be in an official TED Talk for the cost of some plywood and some red paint. You know, it's like there's access to these things. There's ways to like kind of empower ourselves, and so that's where I'll leave it, because that's kind of where, to me, that's why the hacking is interesting. It's because we can take zip ties and like TED signs and lasers and vans with phone numbers, and they kind of they give us this platform that we maybe weren't supposed to have, but that are there kind of for the taking. So with that, I will leave it, and thank you so much for coming. Looking forward to talking to many of you afterwards. If you want to find me, you can. Google Badass Motherfucker. This is another piece, but it gets you to my website. My email is at the bottom here. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Yeah, we can do questions.
Okay.
Thank you, by the way. Thanks, everybody. Does anybody have questions?
You are amazing.
Thanks.
You know, I was an acquaintance of Gordon Matta Clark when I was a young man, and you come as close as I can imagine to this generation and this institution's Gordon Matta Clark.
I can't even react to that. That's quite a compliment, but no, I'm an obvious fan of yours, so thank you.
Do you ever, just a small question, do you ever find yourself either in a dream state or in some moment that's other than this kind of moment, and when you're full of the power and energy of what you're doing?
You mean kind of like the creatively, like?
Well, I'm almost done with the question. Longing for some lasting, tangible, physical presence. The architecture that is so much the anecdote of what you do.
Yeah, no, this is. Someone was asking about this yesterday, actually, because one of the pieces I skipped over was this piece about, it's in the gallery, it's kind of about archiving my internet cache, right? Someone asked me, like, oh, you're doing this because you want to live on, you know, through your internet cache or your portrait. And there is a subconscious part of me that's true, probably for most artists, for most architects. It wasn't a driving force, though. It wasn't, for that piece specifically, it was more interested in, like, archiving the internet more than anyone in specifically, if that makes sense. So I guess the answer would be no. There's not a conscious drive for me to try to make my work or the self sort of live on later.
Yeah, it wasn't that so much, it was the physical stuff, the tangible physical residue, not so much the legacy thing.
Right. It's like the objects, like, will they survive?
Yeah, I mean, you honored this installation in a way that touched me because it's so physical and available and present here, and sort of.
This is something I've come to in the last like 2 or 3 years, because I was really, I had a really adversarial kind of relationship with the art world, where it was, because it's frustrating, because there's this, I wasn't even aware of it until I was kind of getting deeper into it, but money is a huge influence. This is one of the reasons I kind of got out of architecture and went into the web, is I was just so frustrated with money having so much influence over everything. And then now I find myself in a profession again where money is hugely influential, not just in terms of what survives physically, but what gets promoted. And so for a long time, I was really against making these kind of objects from that. And the but to that, though, is that I've been investigating it the last couple of years. I'm trying to find reasons to do that. Trying to find reasons to use these fancy printers that will supposedly archive these images for a long time, you know, or making sculptures, for example. And there are things in it that I think are interesting. And I'm trying to, like, the pieces that I make that are meant to sort of survive time, I'm trying to make sure I'm doing that makes sense. Like, I'm not just printing something out because it's easier to show in a gallery. I'm printing it out because, like for the cash piece, for example, this is one I'm doing in prints. Like that's something that's going to change. Like the screen resolutions change, and the browsers change, and the kind of like HTML4 goes to HTML5, and these standards change, and all of a sudden the work is gone. And so there's a reason for that to be printed in a way where people can look back and see what that looks like, see what now worked like on the internet. And so I guess it's a long way of saying that I'm finding reasons to make some pieces last. I don't think they all have to. Anybody else?
I have 2 questions. Is there ever a piece that you've regretted doing, like your opinion has changed and before, and you thought that the piece wasn't enough?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think there's like deep regret, and there's just like, oh, that was a pretty crappy piece. Probably much more of the like crappy pieces than anything. It's hard to have too much regret, because otherwise it keeps you from making. You know, it keeps you from hitting the publish button. And so I don't have all that many pieces where I was like, oh, I really wish like my career would be so much different if I just hadn't have done that. But there's plenty of pieces that don't show up on the front page of my website.
Wait, so which piece exactly got you the most in trouble?
The most in trouble?
Yeah.
To be honest, like I hang out with so many graffiti writers that risk a lot that I feel bad even answering this question, because I'm not risking that much. You know what I mean? Like going through airport security, maybe I have to go through a couple more times. I've got a couple cease and desist notices that ended in just nothing, you know. So even though a lot of the work is kind of meant to be provocative in some way, I'm not really risking nearly as much as a whole community of people are doing like every day. I mean, graffiti writers, people die writing graffiti. People I have friends that have spent time in jail for like really stupid stuff that doesn't seem important. And so I'm really, even though the work might look kind of, there's supposed to be an edge to it, and I like to put myself in situations where I'm not 100% comfortable, but I'm really risking like way less than a lot of people.
So follow up on that. So have you ever been at a point where, I mean, I'm guessing that for each project you assess what the limit line is. So have you ever thought of doing a project that you couldn't because of crossing that line? Have you ever been blocked by something that you thought would be way too much?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I'm sure the answer to that is yes. I'm sure there's been pieces that I haven't done because the repercussions would have been too much. I mean, one example I can think of that happened to a collaborator of mine, James Powderly, who's making all the graffiti research lab stuff with me. He went to Beijing during the Olympics to kind of show a new tool that we've been working on, and he got busted before he even did the piece. Like security was on them from tapped cell phones and really crazy spy stuff, and he was like really bad spy. He was in a serious Chinese prison for 10 days. And I think it was State Department intervention that got him out. And so that was a real repercussion. And that was, I mean, for him, that he knew that was a risk going in.
I agree with you, so much. With classical definitions of talking about arts, the literature usually economy, sacred and profane. And following that definition, most of the work that we see here is not following the category of sacredness. But I personally, what I see here is it's really, it's hard. It's a very sacred act at so many levels. As a social activist, it promotes social justice. As a human being, it promotes the living moment. And as a designer, challenging our preconceptions and taking the risks of experiments. challenges of classical definition. I would like just to hear your thoughts because you have an architect who backs up there. I think the lessons for us, looking at cultural studios as architects, is that how we can learn from this experience.
I can tell you what I got from being here, which was like hustle. Like, I hadn't worked as hard since I left here. Like graduate school was a breeze. I mean, art students don't even know like what charrette is. It's not even a word. They're like, what's that? And you know, I'm like, okay, this is going to be easy, you know. And to me, that's something that like even the people I reach out to and work with now, I really, really respect drive. I really respect people that are working really, really hard. And I think that's something that the architectural, I think Maryland did it really well, but I think it's sort of built into the culture of architecture, you know, like that idea that this is serious work that's getting done and people are going to stay up as late as they need to do to get it done. Maybe that's a small thing, but that's something that has been drilled into me from here and hasn't left, and I've been better because of it.
Maybe we'll take one more question and then we'll go and enjoy the reception.
And we can talk more out there too.
Talk outside.
Booze.
Patty.
Well, first of all, I want to say this was the best advocacy for open access that I've ever heard. I'm a librarian, and I'm also a punk, which it just absolutely captures all of that sort of punk activism of adding fun to actually making public statements. And a friend of mine teaches film out in Nebraska, and a new book of his is coming out called Streaming. And in it, one of the chapters talks about how these e-readers are watching your eyes now, so that they can then take that information and intervene in art, publishable art, as in novels and things like that, by what people look at and how they read. Basically, they're watching the eye. So I'm just thinking this is what you were showing about the eye is a really great intervention that people can do.
Because
with e-readers.
The e-reader example is a pretty interesting one. A lot of the people that were downloading the iWriter software were, of course, advertisers, right? Because they are fascinated by where your eyeballs are on the screen. And so those questions get really complicated with all this open access stuff. And that's something that it took me like 3 years to get a pretty thick skin to that, because you kind of have to swallow that if you're serious about it. But we had, a lot of the work we were doing was meant to kind of be a statement against the medical industry or against the advertising industry. So it hurt when we would see, like Lucky Strike Cigarettes did a laser tag event we saw on the internet where you would have to sign a form saying that you're 18 and smoking Lucky Strike cigarettes, and then they'd hand you the laser and let you write your name. Like really horrible, like abuses of openness. But in a sense, it's not an abuse of a system that's already open. And so now I'm okay with that in a way that I wasn't that first year, that first 2 years where I was kind of learning that you have to allow it to go in directions that you didn't want. I mean, it's exciting when it goes in a direction you didn't intend, and that place gets you to the things that you can point to, and it's robotic arm writing. But there's, like with the eye tracking, there's a lot of people that are using that eye tracking technology so they can serve you with ads.
But what's great is that you've now given a solution for an intervention.
Yeah.
To send a message.
And I think if it stays open, at least, if it was developed completely within a proprietary system, we would never see that technology, right? Like you're saying. So that this way, like, at least everyone has access to it, I think.
I love the DIY things, because even though you might have for-profit industries trying to take it to their advantage, everything that you provide and putting it on the internet allows people to do it, they just have to have some box, and if not, they just throw like a punk and they shoplift it.
Yeah. And I came from that culture too. I mean, I was taking stuff from the internet. That's how I learned how to write code. Like it was Joshua Davis, right? Like Max and I were downloading all this Joshua Davis code, and he was, I don't even think he was really like an open source. I didn't ever view him as like an activist for it. I think he just was like making cool stuff and had another audience that was looking at his work because they could see how he wrote it. And that was like a really big introduction for me. And so I think part of my interest in open source is that I feel sort of an obligation to it. But there's another way of looking at it where you can be interested in these open ideals and be selfish too. Like a selfish way that I'm engaged in it is that I was more interested in working with this certain group of graffiti writers and a certain group of hackers than I was in, you know, projecting messages on the Snow White cast in Disneyland, which we got invited to do. But if I would have gone and done that in Disneyland, those graffiti writers wouldn't be my friends anymore. Those hackers wouldn't invite me to come hang out with them. And so even just from a selfish standpoint, I just chose that. Like, if I want to be in this circle, if I want to be working with those people who I think are more interesting, then I have to do this. I mean, so there are ways to look at it where it's not just pure gifts. Like we do receive also. Should we go?
Yeah, but I do want to say that tomorrow, one of the gifts of Evan being here is that he's working with 15 of our students, a mixture of art and architecture and students from the Honors College in digital culture and creativity. We're doing a workshop tomorrow, so we'll let you know what comes out of it. Thank you very much.